Lee, you've got a question?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you for the work that you are doing. It appears to me that on your rather long and lonely quest in regard to glyphosate, that you are finding other things that are seriously amiss in the system, and information in general. Can
you just ask?
Listen, if you don't want to have the Mayor coming in acting as a prefect and over a row, please don't interrupt me.
Well, ask the question. You're asking questions.
I have to tell you that I have serious problems with figures given to me as a director of Auckland Transport when it comes to simple things like the cost of building rail. So when Kiwi Rail built the Onehunga branch line, it was 2.9 million. Now Auckland Transport says 165 million per kilometre. So are you suggesting that the problem with information is bigger than just information about chemicals?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Lee, I asked you just to ask a question, and you made quite a dissertation, which was just...
Well, it's about sharing information, exchanging information.
It's question time. I think that's...
This is about democracy, Mr Chairman. You're acting in a restrictive way and holding up the meeting and doing it.
Councillor Walker, you got a question?
Sure. I've got a question, and it's against a background of probably an absence of public confidence in this council on this issue and a lack of openness and transparency, and often a circumstance where questions and issues can't be raised because they get shut down. So that's the context of my question. And it goes down, my question goes to the figures that you're raising, which go to costs. And around public confidence, because I understand that some of these figures have come from sources that are before the courts for fraud. That's one thing. I'd like your confirmation around that.
Oh, Councillor Walker.
This is a question that I'm asking. It's a simple question.
Well, ask the question simply, or I'll rule that you're not to ask the question. So make your decision up. Make a decision now.
So I'm asking for some confirmation on that point.
Oh, she wouldn't.
Is that the case?
It's not the point.
Well, I think that's a stupid question, because you know that the matter would be sub judice.
Well, it goes to public. It goes to public confidence. It goes to openness and transparency, and the difficulty that the community have for getting good information. It's also true to say, and I'd seek your confirmation, that there are very large sums of money involved in these contracts, that there are very large companies involved that have a vested interest in using toxic chemicals, irrespective of whether it's good for people's health or not.
Councillor Walker, you are actually just making a statement here. You're not asking a question. Can you please either ask a question or don't...
So how much money are we talking about with these contracts? Hannah, do you have any idea?
Well, when you... and again, I would be very grateful if this document, the full explanation document, is tabled, because within there you will see that when we got these sort of figures from Auckland Transport, I personally went and spoke to contractors and asked them what their price was. And I have extrapolated their replies into this document. So we have instances where, using the same methodology that Auckland Transport has used, we have, for instance, a situation where hot water is cheaper than glyphosate in some circumstances.
Thank you.
So yes, the whole question, and the original one that Councillor Walker asked, is that a lot of the problems do seem to be within the North Shore and Rodney area, which has been the subject of a serious fraud investigation. And yes, some of the original Auckland Transport officers who denied me information are those officers who are now being prosecuted.
Thank you for the answer to my question.
Well, I think you knew the question. You knew the answer all the time, Councillor Walker, but it doesn't matter. Councillor Fletcher, you've got a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Hannah. I just want to be quite clear. What you were saying is that you would prefer that this come back to the council from Auckland Transport.
It seems to me to be logical. We've split the operation, and my huge concerns obviously are around cost, because what's happening is that by splitting the operation and having all of these middlemen operating, that there is a huge increase in the price. So if ratepayers want to save money, then I think that the first thing is it should come back. And secondly, the operation doesn't have a finish, it's not at a boundary. And I think that the vegetation control experts are able to operate across the boundaries. So, for instance, where you've got a park edging at the moment, do we stop here? And Auckland Transport starts there. And I think to bring it back in to city parks, I think would obviously be a huge cost savings. And then the savings that we make, we can then go to the alternatives. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. With that, I'll move that we thank Hannah Blackmore for her presentation this morning, and seconded by Councillor Fletcher. I'll put that motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declare that carried. Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you, councillors.
And the next submitter is Tricia Cheel from the Friends of Sherwood. Thank you, Tricia.
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Point of order. Mr. Chairman, I know that there's a huge amount of passion, and we've seen that demonstrated around the chamber so far already, and certainly there's a great deal of passion on the part of the submitters. But, Mr. Chairman, I think it's reasonable for you to enforce council standing orders which give 5 minutes to each presenter. That's standing orders, Mr. Chairman, and I would expect that you would, as an experienced councillor and a former mayor, that you would enforce those standing orders.
Well, Councillor Quacks, thank you for your suggestion. As the mayor has
suggestion,
said,
Mr. Chairman.
Well, no, I know what standing orders say,
Good.
but we don't. We're not rigid in the way that they are adhered to on many occasions, and I think, as the mayor said, this is a very emotive issue. These people have come here this morning prepared to give their presentation. The presentations were actually just over the 5 minute mark, because
No, they were 9 minutes, Mr. Chairman. I timed them.
well, the clerk is timing them as well, and I think that from that point it was okay. I think the fact that questions are put to the submitters, which are not just questions, but they have a substantial preamble, is the problem. And I asked councillors in the next with this submitter not to just ask a question, and that
It's not the questions, Mr. Chairman, that are subject to standing orders.
Okay.
It is the presentation.
Thank
And if
you.
you want to be the Wayne Barnes of the Auckland Council, well, that's fine. But, you need to enforce standing orders, Mr. Chairman. It's not quite simple.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Quacks. Ms. Cheel, thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'm the coordinator for Friends of Sherwood, and sadly, just last month, we farewelled our chairperson of the last 26 years, and it was merciful that for the past couple of years he hasn't been mobile enough to see the terrible neglect that our plantings have suffered since being handed back to council, considering all the time and effort that he put into them. We're still waiting for reassurance that there will be no further toxic chemicals being used in the Sherwood Basin or the Taiatea catchment, so it is safe for our volunteers to try to rescue as much as we can of this over $500,000 project. And it's disappointing to see such community effort being tossed aside so cavalierly by this council, and the saga of the weed management policy is yet another example. Although the Auckland Council weed management policy is mainly based on the Auckland City Council one, we concur with the sentiment that the use of agri-chemicals be minimised. North Shore City Council policy was more satisfactory by promoting the use of non-toxic methods wherever possible, and the work of Friends of Sherwood right from the very first totally biased Devonport weed trial have shown beyond a shadow of a doubt that they can compete favourably with the cost of glyphosate if all the costs are accounted for, such as the health care for the victims. Furthermore, with the community involvement that our integrated organic management models promote, the results are far superior. You received the information last year that the World Health Organisation declared glyphosate to be a probable human carcinogen back in March. Auckland Transport Parks, and indeed Council as a whole, ignored the warning and not only increased the use of this genotoxic endocrine disruptor, but also cut funding for non-toxic weed control in the long-term plan. A mere $1.5 million, I believe, that protected the community against much larger personal health expenditure. In effect, this means that most of the real cost is transferred to the victims. Just last year, a momentous event was largely ignored by the media, but the 100,000th chemical was registered in June 2015. These are substances that haven't existed on Earth before, and the effects of which are largely unknown, since testing is mostly done by the manufacturers. And it's a bit like having the burglars in charge of the crown jewels, and never any consideration of the synergistic, accumulative or compound effects which have been shown to be considerable, such as the influence of fluoride and the uptake of lead, which again, I wish John Tamahiri was here today, has been shown to affect African Americans and Hispanics far more than Caucasians, for instance. If we truly to have the most livable city, then it's only common sense to make sure that it is as free as possible of toxic chemicals, waste and other pollution, as Friends of Sherwood keep asking for. Why use toxic chemicals or poisons or degrading, polluting practices where there are better ways to achieve a goal that don't put everyone at risk? On Friday, the 1st of July, that's just last Friday, a collaboration of scientists, health professionals and children's and environmental advocates released a scientific consensus statement called Project Tender as a national call to action to significantly reduce exposure to chemicals and pollutants that are contributing to neurodevelopment disorders in children because of concern over the now substantial scientific evidence linking toxic environmental chemicals to these disorders. People's exposure to these chemicals are widespread and begin in utero, and infants and children are especially at risk. The majority of chemicals are untested for these effects, and the ones that they list are just the tip of the iceberg. Only a minority of chemicals have been evaluated for neurotoxic effects in adults, and even fewer have been evaluated for potential effects on brain development in children. Further toxicological studies and regulatory evaluations seldom address combined effects of chemical mixtures, despite evidence that all people are exposed to dozens of chemicals at any given time. And I have that report here I'd like to table for the information of the members. So they say our system for evaluating scientific evidence and making decisions about environmental chemicals is broken. We cannot continue to gamble with our children's health. Friends of Sherwood would like to point out that although there's a good start, this does only address the tip of the iceberg, and we suspect that there is a restraint through this project tender to not upset powerful lobby groups such as the chemical manufacturers too much. So we can do better than that surely here in Auckland. Note that the organophosphates that they talk about include malathion, which is classified by the World Health Organization as a probable human carcinogen in category 2A, along with diazinon and the glyphosate. So we're talking about similar toxic chemicals, as described by the IARC manuscript of the World Health Organization, and I believe you got a copy of that last year, but I've got another one here for those who may have missed out.
Thank you. I think that you're up to the 5 minutes now.
I've just...
I will have to ask you to wrap up now then.
Okay. So we're looking at a tsunami of obesity, diabetes, dementia, etc., and how much can be attributed to this chemical warfare is not yet totally determined. So we're asking maybe the chair of Auckland Transport could go to the District Health Board that he also chairs to start to evaluate just how much his love of chemicals is costing that budget. This project observes the economic costs associated with the neurodevelopmental disorders are staggering. It costs twice as much to educate the child.
Thank you. I think we'll have to finish now.
But I'd just like, as I say,
We
I'd
are
like
over
this.
the 5 minutes.
I've got this last.
No,
I move an extension of time,
I'll
Mr.
ask
Chairman.
if there are any questions.
I'll second that.
This is an important health and safety question, and a question of community well-being and trust in the system.
Okay, I'll put that then. There's been a motion put on the floor that we extend the time of the submitter.
By how much?
Well, she's finished.
You have to
One
nominate a time.
minute. Come on.
Who's chairing the meeting now?
I'm proposing
by-
1 minute.
Point of order. We've got
Hey,
respect for the chair.
Councillor Lee, do you wish to put a time on how?
3 minutes?
Madam, how long do you need?
1 minute would be
One-
fine. I've got
1
about
minute
that
will
much
do.
left.
Mi-
that's
minute-
all.
1
A minute is fine.
It's a motion on the
Aye.
floor.
Second that.
Aye.
Is that?
I'll second that. You happy with a minute?
Aye.
1 minute. I'll put that motion. Those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Against?
Thank you very
Okay, you've
much.
got 1 minute. We have time.
It's the most important part of it really is that a 2009 analysis in the United States found that for every $1 spent to reduce exposures to lead, and we're talking about a range of chemicals here that includes glyphosate, a potent neurotoxin, society would benefit by $17 to $221. No doubt the cost-benefit ratio of reducing exposure to glyphosate and other toxic chemicals would be broadly in the same region. So you have the opportunity today to make a start on the reduction in the prevalence of those hazards in our city by enacting your own weed management policy and restoring the budget for non-toxic weed control as required by the policy. So spend no more of my rate money on these poisons, please. No rates for Roundup or fluoride or 1080 or cholecalciferol or brodifacoum or even plastic bags for that matter. So that's the main point I came along to say is the health costs are never accounted for and they are staggering and they are being loaded onto the victims and it's got to stop.